Let's hunt some
monsters. Let me know any tips and tricks you have in the comments down below. We'll start with some really easy stuff, and then we'll get into some more of the complex systems that are in Monster Hunter Wilds. The first thing of that easy stuff is changing some settings in your options menu. Firstly, I would highly recommend to jump into your options and into the camera settings, and there's a setting on the second page here called camera distance zoom. You want to max this out to 10 and pull your camera all the way back. There are a lot of very, very large monsters in Monster Hunter Wilds, and the further your camera is back from your character, the much easier it will be to be able to see them, to be able to avoid their attacks, especially when they jump up in the air and they land next to you, so you can actually dodge, roll out of the way, or block them, or however you choose to deal with them. Now, you could make it even closer if you did want to. I just personally prefer to go out. Now, there's a couple of other settings in the controls as well that you can play around with, because the controls here are quite a little bit cumbersome, I think, just personally, and I found that the customization here just really helps with that. One of them is that you can toggle the focus mode to not requiring you to hold down the button, so it is actually on a toggle. So focus mode is really, really important for this game, and I'll tell you why a little bit later in this video, but it's an important setting that maybe you might want to change just so you've always got focus mode active, or active most of the time, without having to hold that button, because it does get a little bit annoying when you're trying to hold all of the other buttons to do all the different like attack combos, but you've also got to hold that focus mode button. There is also a lot of customization in the controls other than that you can play around with as well, and just find whatever works for you. Personally, I changed some of those radial menu like button combinations just that flowed a little bit better for me, but that's entirely up to you. I just think it's worth pointing out that these exist and that you can tinker with a lot of the controls in these options. And before you go hunting too many monsters, you really should spend some time at the training ground, not only to test different weapons and combinations and learn some combos, but also to find a weapon you actually like. I kind of guarantee a little bit that if you're not vibing with the game's combat, it's probably to do with a weapon that you're using, because a lot of the weapons are vastly different. Not only in the way that you move when you use that weapon, you could move very slow, you can move very fast, but also the attack combinations are entirely unique, and a lot of the weapons also have unique mechanics around how they actually work, like the insect glaive, for example, or any of the morph weapons that could be a sword and shield, and then you can combine that into an axe, or all sorts of other combinations. So finding a weapon that really works for you is best done at the training ground rather than in the middle of a hunt when you're fighting a monster that's probably going to kill you. So it's definitely worthwhile spending that time at the training ground, finding that little machine, but you can also talk to the Palico if you want to change the way that machine operates. You can actually make it attack you or do various other things, but also check the guide as well in your menu for a detailed explanation of every single weapon, what those weapon combinations are for that specific weapon. If that weapon has any unique features, it'll detail them here and give you explanations of how exactly they work, as well as any other features that that weapon has. Hugely recommend reading this information if you are going to pick a certain weapon and actually trying to learn it, because it's definitely valuable. But hey, you could probably check back on this channel in a couple of days and I'll have plenty of weapon guides for you as well. Now, another thing you should do before you go hunting monsters, which we'll definitely get to in this video, I swear, is upgrading your equipment. However, during the story and while you're sort of in that leveling up process and increasing your guild rank, you probably don't really have to worry too much about the armor that you're wearing and the overall equipment, because you won't have access to most of the kit and the materials that are required. As you progress through the story, you sort of unlock more monsters, which unlocks more materials, and then unlocks more gear that you'll eventually be able to get. For your weapons, I would be upgrading them and making sure you're crafting the weapon that has the highest attack rating. Now, weapons that have status effects do have a little bit less attack rating. That's still valuable to grab, especially the ones that have like paralysis or sleep, as they're very common that most enemies can't actually do anything about them. But ultimately, you're not going to be able to make like a perfect build during the story and that leveling process. So weapon wise, you just want to be making sure you're actually crafting new weapons and following that progression tier. And then also with your armor, really you just want to focus on that armor rating and getting that highest amount of armor rating just throughout the story. Definitely important to do. Don't forget to change your armor and upgrade your armor as well. Once that does unlock for you in the story, you can upgrade your armor, which will increase its overall defensive rating. Definitely worthwhile doing, especially before you get to some of those apex predators and those big boss fights you get throughout the story. And the last thing to check while you're talking to Gemma is also the charms. Now, charms will help you complete some of those like skill combinations that you might be looking for, but also there's a lot of unique charms that can really help with your overall build and variety as well. So definitely make sure you've got a charm equipped once you have unlocked that feature. Make sure you're leveling up your armor and your weapons. Even if it's not a perfect build, don't worry too much, because the main thing is to actually just be leveling through the story to get to the good stuff. But don't go hunting for monsters yet.
Oh, hurry up, I'm a busy man.
Just going out in the world is definitely worthwhile doing, because there are a lot of materials that you can get from the resource nodes that are in the world, as well as treasures that can then be traded with NPCs for various resources as well. So you don't always need to actually leave the camp specifically on a hunt and completing that hunt, which, you know, if you start a hunt from the camp, you'll go out, do that hunt, and then it'll immediately travel you back to the camp. Instead, you can actually just go out into the world. You can just start hunts while you're out there just by attacking monsters as well. But for the most part, going out and just material hunting is worthwhile doing, especially when you get to new regions, because those regions will have new materials that you might want to actually go out and grab as well. So spending that time hunting for those is definitely worthwhile. Also on the map, you can check when those deposit like resource nodes will actually respawn. It's about a 15-minute timer, and if you put a custom marker on the map, your Siekret mount will actually just auto travel to it, so it does make that resource hunting a little bit easier. We'll have some more stuff for the Siekret mount a little bit as well. Loadouts are definitely important for this feature as well, but also just for your overall like play and play style. So loadouts are a great way to prepare for hunts, because you can create loadouts specifically for certain types, say like a water loadout if you're fighting like say a fire monster, but even just for that resource gathering that we were talking about, right? Like the chainmail set that you get right at the start of the game that anyone can get has the geologist skill on it, which means that you'll get an increased amount of bones and stone resources when you're gathering from those specific nodes. Conversely, the leather set does the same thing for like bugs and herbs and the likes. You can actually get charms as well that have the geologist and the botanist skills on them as well, but definitely worthwhile doing if you are going to go back and do that last step that we were just talking about of actually being able to get those resources. But they're mainly going to be using these loadouts for those different weapon loadouts and different armor loadouts in the late game, but you will get a little bit of value from them in the early game by doing this. But also item loadouts are definitely important. Now you can create loadouts to have certain traps, certain potions to take with you. Say for example, if you're in a fire area, you're probably going to want that cold drink, because when you're in these high heat areas or these really cold areas, you will get a debuff if you don't have a hot or a cold drink. You can find bugs that will acquire the same effect, but it's worthwhile just having loadouts specifically for these, making sure you've got those potions with you, and traps and anything that you want to actually take with you as well. And also make sure you're not just like carrying an entire pouch full of crafting materials. Make sure you're storing those, because you will get a pop-up if your bag is full, and it is kind of annoying when you're right in the middle of a monster hunt. One thing that's easy to forget to do as well is food buffs. Now, food buffs are hugely important, as they give you a ton of extra health and stamina, which is fantastic for fighting monsters, but they can also give you different other effects like increasing your attack, increasing your defense, or elemental resistance, which is very important when you are fighting enemies that have these specific element types that they're hitting you with. Could be lightning, fire, whatever it may be. Definitely important. Now, when you are making this food, using the recommended option isn't typically advised. You probably want to go into that custom, because you can then change to say use veggies, because veggies have that elemental resistance, or you could actually make the food specifically that you're looking for those certain encounters. A lot of like say the early game hunts that I've like gone on just to get materials, I've basically just brought food that's like attack power, because I don't need that defense. But then like the harder fights that I'm actually doing for the story, or any of those like apex predators sort of fights, you definitely want more of that defensive capabilities for those encounters. So make sure you're crafting food specifically for the type of encounter you're looking for, but also go to the NPCs at the various camps in the regions as well, because they will have resources that you could trade in to actually get some of these food items and crafting materials, so you don't have to go and gather them yourself, because like finding all these mushrooms and different resources can take a bit of time. So having these NPCs at the camps that you can just trade with is definitely valuable. The only combat tip you need is focus mode. Now, when you are fighting those monsters, focus mode is so huge, because with Monster Hunter Wilds, you can now create wounds on enemies by attacking the specific same point on that enemy multiple times. It will then create a wound, and then you can like pop that wound for additional damage. But when you do that as well, you'll actually get materials from that monster as well, which is the main way that you'll actually farm resources from the monsters now. It's not from like carving them up or capturing them. It's really actually from the wounds and breaking off certain parts of of that monster. So definitely try and focus on a specific limb or the head or the tail or something like that. In your menu, if you open up the large monster field guide, you'll actually be able to see which parts of the body certain materials will drop from. So you want to be either creating wounds on those parts of the body or actually breaking them off. You can see what that percentage is if you have a wound in that spot or if you're breaking off that part of the body as well. So it's important to make sure that if you're focusing on trying to find a specific material, make sure you're creating those wounds and using the focus mode to actually pop them. A really easy way to create multiple wounds on an enemy is actually to get on your mount and then jump off the mount, land on top of the monster, and then hack away and create a wound. Now, you don't actually have to pop the wound that you create when you have created it when you're mounted. You can actually travel up and down the monsters by moving like your movement button. You'll be able to move up and down its spine. So you can create multiple wounds by doing this, and then you can jump off or just trigger the finisher while you're on there. And then you've got multiple wounds that you can then trigger for all the resources, but also for the massive damage that you get from actually doing that. But let's talk about your mount, as it's another one of the new things that has come with Monster Hunter Wilds. It is hugely useful in and outside combat. It's useful outside combat, as we've talked about, to travel around the map and actually follow the monsters when they move to new areas, but you should actually be calling it in combat as well. It can save you from attacks because it will auto path away from attacks sometimes, and also you can just get some distance if you need to. This will allow you to heal, it'll allow you to remove status effects, change your weapon as well, or open your pouch, because now the buttons on the D-pad will trigger a lot of these effects. So down just calls your Siekret, up will auto follow, like if you want to just follow something or find something. Left will open your pouch. Now, while you are actually on these hunts, a lot of the hunts you'll actually get items during the hunt as well as at the start. These are marked with like EZ in front of the item. They'll just appear in your pouch. You'll need to jump on your mount, open up the pouch, put them onto like your own pouch as well, so that you can actually use them when you're fighting the monsters. And then the right on the D-pad will just change your weapon. As you can have two weapons active at once, you'll be able to change that weapon on your mount. If say you might have brought like a really heavy hitting hammer or a slow weapon, and then you might have a really fast like agile weapon as your secondary weapon, which is typically like the setup that I've run. Also worth noting that you can customize your Siekret mount at the tent as well. You can change their overall look if you want to say match them to like an armor piece that you're wearing, or you just want to change up their style. The pop-up tents are very important because they allow you to fast travel to specific parts of the map, as well as change any of your tent requirements that you may want to change equipment, you may want to cook some food, you may want to do all sorts of things. You can do all of those at your pop-up tent. Now, pop-up tents will unlock progressively throughout the story. The further you progress and like unlocking new regions, you'll actually unlock the option to have more pop-up tents in the existing regions that you have as well. But by going and talking to the support Palico, you'll be able to customize your pop-up tents and actually create them for a couple of guild points. Like, it does cost a little bit to be able to build these. Now, even though it says dangerous, honestly, it doesn't really matter because they do auto-generate after a certain amount of time if a monster does destroy them. So you probably never even really notice if a pop-up tent is like missing for whatever reason, but also you can customize these if you do want to. But the main thing to remember with these is that you can fast travel to them, so you don't have to go back to base camp every time, especially in some of these larger regions. You might want to travel to here if you're, say, trying to hunt specific resource nodes, or if there's a monster in the area that you might want to travel to go and defeat. Now, before you start any actual hunt, there's a couple of things you should do. We've talked about the food buff. You can go and check that section of this video. You should also check your weapons and check to see the weaknesses that that monster actually has in that monster field guide. For example, if you're fighting a fire monster, it might be weak to water and ice. You might want to bring a water or an ice weapon with you and check what status effects it's weak to, like paralysis, sleep, etc. Make sure you've got equipment that's based on that. Also, if that monster does fire damage, you probably want to wear armor that has fire resistance rather than the opposite. And then you're pretty much good to go and actually start that monster hunt, unless you're joining with friends or you want to use an SOS flare, etc. But also during the story, before you like progress to like that next monster hunt, the story basically is like, hey, you should stop here and prepare. And you probably should actually do that, like go back and do some of the optional hunts, build up your own resource pool and craft some better gear, because chances are that next fight's going to be quite challenging. Now, a quick bonus one at the end here, don't forget about your Palico. I'm probably going to make an entire video talking about their cute little friends, but they do need their own gear, and you can upgrade them from talking to Gemma as well. You've got the Forge Palico equipment there, and they will be able to craft different weapons that have different effects, as well as armor that has better resistances. So make sure when you are going into these harder fights that you're matching their armor to make sure that they've got the right resistances, as well as a weapon that's like complementary to what you're using. Say if you're using like a paralysis weapon, you might want to have them have the same so you can trigger that status effect a little bit quicker. But let me know any tips that you have in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.